Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Jeremiah. Today we are in chapter 37. And in chapter 37, we are now looking at the situation where it was after chapter 21 of a very similar event, where it was at a time where Jeremiah was giving the prophecy to the people of Jerusalem and to the king that the king of Babylon will definitely come and take over and burn down the city, and that they are not supposed to fight the Babylonians. And the prophets that are advising the king at that time would be King Zedekiah, and they would say that no, 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 God will remove the Babylonians and everything will be at peace again. And so the contrasting words by the prophets that Zedekiah is listening to and Jeremiah, whom God was sending to them to speak his words, seems to be at odds. They clash. Now, in chapter 37, it says, and then this would be our traditional sequential event, right? And then we are told that this is at the time of King Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, and he reigned instead of Coniah, the son of Jehoiakim, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, made king in the land of Judah. Now, this is an important time for us to just recap a little bit. Please bear in mind, at the time of Josiah, he had a son. And when he died, his son, uh, Jehoahaz, took over. But he didn't last for 3 months, and he was taken to Egypt. In his place, uh, there would be another king, and the king would be another son of Josiah by the name of Eliakim. And his name is also given as Jehoiakim. And he reigned for 11 years. After he died, we find that the Egyptians were at the tail end of supporting Judah, and on their way back, they appointed Jeconiah or Jehoiakim. And this one, I will give you the other name, Jeconiah, because we will be talking about him. And he was there only for 3 months. When the king of Babylon came to lay siege and attack Judah, they removed Jehoiakim or Jeconiah and brought him to Babylon. And in his place, the king of Babylon placed another son of Josiah by the name of Zedekiah. And Zedekiah reigned for 11 years. Now, Zedekiah started off as a righteous king, but because he listened to the people and to the false prophets, he began to wane and not listen to Jeremiah. And so this chapter begins our lesson that we can see how far Zedekiah has fallen. In verse 2, it says, but neither he nor his servants nor the people of the land gave heed to the words of the Lord which he spoke by the prophet Jeremiah. Now, what's important for us to realize is that in the earlier part of his life, he actually did. And so we were told by the Jewish sages that Zedekiah started off well, but because he listened to his servants and to the people of the land, and particularly also to the false prophets, he started to ignore the prophet Jeremiah. Now, here we are told that the prophet Jeremiah has a particular interest that God is using him to speak to the people the words of the Lord which God spoke by the prophet. And so now we have a contention. The people preferred the false prophets that said that no worries, that the king of Babylon is not going to be successful. They will not be able to take over the city of Jerusalem. God will forever protect the place. But that wasn't true. It came to a point in time when God spoke to Jeremiah. And in chapter 21, we also saw what God said through Jeremiah to the people and the king, that it is not going to last, that God is going to give in to the hand of the king of Babylon. In verse 3, we begin another passage. This word and is actually and then. Very similar to chapter 21. Zedekiah the king sent Yahukal, the son of Shelemiah, and as well as Zephaniah. We read it as Zephaniah, the son of Maaseiah, the priests. And they came to meet with the prophet Jeremiah. Now, the reason why it was done this way was because the king Zedekiah really felt that there must be something that God is saying, but these prophets that's around him doesn't seem to be saying what God is wanting to tell. Now, how he knew, we don't know. But all we do know is that from verse 3, Zedekiah was curious and wanted to hear from Jeremiah. And he speaks to Jeremiah through these people, Yahukal, Zephaniah, and Maaseiah. The three of them would be the three most trusted lieutenants, the three most trusted leaders around the king. And the message was this: pray now to the Lord God for us. Now, this is important for one reason. It says here to pray, in this case, in the English pray, is actually hit palel. That's what it means. Hit palel. The idea of a hit palel, let me just put it down. Hit palel is actually introspection. It is not just merely asking. It is to query and ask God what has gone wrong. That would be the idea of pray. So it's not a modern English word, but in the Hebrew, it's very much more of an introspection to check what has gone wrong. Now, in verse 4, it says, and now Jeremiah was coming and going among the people. This is important because in a previous chapter, we saw that Jeremiah was already locked up in the courts of the king. But he is, at this point in time in verse 4, he was freely coming and going, for they had not yet put him in prison. Verse 5, Pharaoh's army came up from Egypt, and when the Chaldeans were besieging Jerusalem, heard news of them, they departed from Jerusalem. So there is always a contention between Egypt and the Babylonians, the Egyptians and the Chaldeans. And the Chaldeans gave way to the Egyptians at this point in time. We come to verse 6. Verse 6 says, and then, this is after all these discussions from 1 to 5. And then the word of the Lord came to the prophet Jeremiah. Now, understand this, the word of the Lord comes in the form of a dream, come in the form of a vision, come in the form of audible sounds. And Jeremiah knows exactly that it is Jehovah who came to speak to him. And so King Zedekiah wants to know what God has to say about all these things. And so God says this, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. He says, thus you shall say to the king of Judah who sent you to me to inquire of me. Understand the word inquire is to ask or seek counsel. Asking what's wrong, what has happened. And the answer is this. Behold, Pharaoh's army, which has come up to help you, will return to Egypt. Now, just now we read the Chaldeans left and Pharaoh's army was there, but they will return to Egypt, to their own land. And we read in 2 Kings 24, when they left, they never came back. And so the kings of Judah will never be able to depend or trust in the Egyptians. When the Pharaoh's army returned back to their own land, the Chaldeans here will come back and fight against this city, Jerusalem, take it and burn it with fire. This is what God is saying. These are prophetic words. However, we need to be aware that nobody likes to hear doomsday prophecy. It's like, whenever we hear of prophecy, it's always about bad news. And the bad news here is the Egyptians will leave and the Chaldeans will come back and fight the city. Remember, Zedekiah was installed by the Babylonians after the Egyptians installed Jehoiakim. Midway through this, Zedekiah thought that he could rely on the Egyptians. For a moment, he thought right because the Egyptians did come to his assistance. But God is saying that they will return to Egypt and the Chaldeans will come, will take the city and burn it with fire. It says, thus says the Lord, do not deceive yourselves by saying, the Chaldeans will surely depart from us, which is what the false prophets is saying, for they will not depart. There's another key word, will not depart. The Egyptians will return, the Chaldeans will come, the Chaldeans will not depart. For though you had defeated the whole army of the Chaldeans who fight against you. Now, verse 10 is a hypothetical. This word is for though or for if. It's hypothetical. Let's say that you actually managed to defeat the entire army of the Chaldeans. Guess what? And there remain only wounded men from among them, and they're all wounded. Well, in God's view, the prophetic sayings would be, they would rise up, every man in his tent, and burn the city with fire. So, what is sure is that the Chaldeans will burn the city with fire, whether they are whole or whether they are wounded. That prophecy will take place. This is the difference between Jeremiah and the other prophets, because the words of Jeremiah is what God said, and it will come to pass and will justify what Jeremiah has said. Verse 11. Verse 11 says this, and it happened when the army of the Chaldeans left Jerusalem for fear of Pharaoh's army. So think of it this way. We have the Chaldeans, and then they install Zedekiah, and Zedekiah decided to ask help from the Egyptians. Then the Chaldeans left. But what did God say is this, that the Egyptians will return back to Egypt, and hereby the Chaldeans will come and they will not relent. So we are now, at this time, the Egyptians are there because the Chaldeans are leaving with the Egyptians there to support Zedekiah. So Jeremiah went out of Jerusalem to go into the land of Benjamin to claim his property there among the people. And when he was at the gate of Benjamin, a guard or a captain of the guard was there, whose name in verse 13 was Ir Iriya Iriya, right? Iriya, the son of Shelemiah, and he's the son of Hananiah. And he seized or arrested Jeremiah the prophet, saying, "You are defecting to the Chaldeans." The idea here is that they have a fake charge against Jeremiah, because Jeremiah seems to be saying that the Chaldeans will be successful. So, in the mind of these people, it seems that Jeremiah was really on the side of the Chaldeans. Verse 14 says, and then, remember, and then means after he was arrested. And then Jeremiah said, false. It is not true. Now, instead of saying false, it'd be better to say lies. These are all lies, falsehoods. Why? Because that is not true. I am not defecting to the Chaldeans. But he did not listen to him. So we find that in verse 14, we have Ir-iyah. Ir-iyah had decided to take action. And he arrested Jeremiah and brought him to the princes, the powerful people around the throne. Verse 15. And then the princes were angry with Jeremiah, and they struck him and put him in prison in the house of Jonathan the scribe, for they had made that, or his house, the prison. The prison means a place where he cannot move around. You can say that it is in a form of confinement or incarceration. Verse 16. When Jeremiah entered the dungeon and the cells, and Jeremiah had remained there many days, we don't know how many, but quite a number of days, Zedekiah the king sent and took him and asked him secretly in his house and said, "Is there any word from the Lord?" Now, remember, notice the whole conversation is very interesting because Zedekiah really believes that Jeremiah is carrying the message of God and not the other false prophets. Continuing from verse 17, it says, "And then, after the king asked, and then Jeremiah said to the king, There is. Then he said, You shall be delivered, or you shall be taken and into the hand of the king of Babylon." So this idea of delivered literally means you will be taken, right? You will be given or given over by God to the king of Babylon, and it will be in the hand of the king that he will personally be given by God. So the idea is that this is another doomsday prophecy that God has said that Zedekiah will be placed into the hand of the king of Babylon. That's basically the final words of God to Zedekiah. Moreover, and then Jeremiah had more to say to the king Zedekiah. He asked, What offense have I committed against you? What have I sinned? Now, this is that word. The word offense here is khatat, right? Or khata. What have I missed or sinned in the English? Basically, the idea here is, what did I not do that you have told me to do? So what offense in that sense? But in the Hebrew, this word is khata. It means that Jeremiah may have missed doing certain things, and those misses requires him to be arrested and incarcerated in prison. And so the question that Jeremiah asked King Zedekiah is, what khata? What did I sin? What have I sinned against you, against your servants, or against this people that you have put me in prison? So the idea here is Zedekiah is asked point blank by Jeremiah, why am I in jail, basically? And Zedekiah again spoke directly to the king. Where now are your prophets who prophesied to you, saying that the king of Babylon will not come against you against this land? That's false. And so now we have in verse 20, and now please hear, listen, O my Lord the king, O my Adoni the king. Now understand this, the word my Lord, when it is not applied to God, it carries the word Adoni. But when it comes to God, it will be pronounced as Adonai. But the whole idea here is, yes, Jeremiah is very respectful of King Zedekiah because King Zedekiah is the anointed of God. So he says, please let my petition be accepted before you. Don't make me return to the house of Jonathan the scribe, lest I die there. That if I stay there, nobody would care and I would die. So King Zedekiah listened. And so the idea here we are given, verse 21, and then. And then Zedekiah, the king, commanded. Now, the idea of command is zava. It's like God giving a command, And so this is the same concept. The king gave a command. So when the king gives a command, it must be listened to, that they should commit Jeremiah to the court of the prison. The court means the open space, so that it is not in the confined space. And that they should give him a daily piece of bread from the baker's street. That's where bread is baked. So a piece of bread, in that sense, would be lechem, until all the bread in the city was gone. And when was it gone? The final siege of King Nebuchadnezzar upon Jerusalem. So when that time came, when King of Babylon comes to lay siege on the city, they will all come to a point in time where there was no more bread. And so in chapter 37, we're not terribly concerned about the fact that there was no bread or the city was gone, but that is going to happen because the prophecy that was granted to tell to King Zedekiah was that, yes, you will be given into the hands of the king of Babylon. That the king of Babylon will come, the Chaldeans will destroy the city and the temple. And that is totally against all the false prophets. But Zedekiah needed to know from Jeremiah. Now, by that, we can have an inference that Zedekiah does fear God and wants to hear what God has to say. Though his princes, his people, his leaders really couldn't be bothered with what Jeremiah has to say, in fact, arrested Jeremiah and incarcerated him into the dungeon. But we are told that after many days, King Zedekiah really wanted to know what Jeremiah has heard from God. The conclusion is the same. Different words, the city will be destroyed. But more interestingly is about Zedekiah himself, because the word pray is hitpalel, meaning to judge himself. And Zedekiah wants to know what he needs to do and what information he has to look at himself as an introspection to realize what God has said is true. And so God says, you will be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon, and that will be it. And by listening to that, King Zedekiah honored what Jeremiah had done and removed him from the prison and placed him into the courts, where he is freely moving about within the confines of the court, but definitely not in jail in that sense. And thus Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison for the rest of his days. Now, with this, we come to the end of Jeremiah chapter 37. Remember, in the book of Jeremiah, they do not necessarily move from chapter to chapter in a chronological form. We will get a chapter here and a chapter there, and we must be able to connect these chapters together because they don't flow one to the other, but they are separated possibly by tens of chapters. And so in tomorrow's chapter 38, we will find that things will be different again. And so with this, we come to the end of our session today.